Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we have another trip to the realm of the paranormal, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My parents lived in this trailer on my grandparents' property that sat directly behind a really old cemetery. Some of the oldest graves were dated to deaths in the 1760s, but most of the others were people that died in the 1800s and early 1900s. And the cemetery was pretty run down and of course very creepy. The cemetery was small, about the size of a football field's end zone, with tall, distorted tombs shaped in semi-human forms, but mostly really plain graves with small engraved stones. Plus, this land had arrowheads and other Indian stone tools everywhere on the land, and you could find stuff when they plowed the fields, so this land had some history behind it. My dad was in the trailer that was behind the cemetery, and the phone rang, and when he answered it, was a static-filled call that was garbled, which was odd for a landline in the 70s before wireless became popular. He said it sounded like a field telephone, whatever that is, and on the other line was a woman with an old-timey voice wanting to speak to Lizzie Plummer. He told the woman that she must have the wrong number, and she got aggravated and assured him that she was there and to give Lizzie the phone. The woman had nothing to say beside reassuring my dad that Lizzie was there and demanding to speak with her in increasingly aggravated tones after being told multiple times that she had the wrong number. The woman would repeat, "I know she's there. I want to talk to Lizzie, she's there." And my dad gave up and hung up the phone on the woman and didn't think much of it. Then a few days later, my dad was weed-eating around the tombstones, and after he finished, he was looking at some of the older graves and was stopped in his tracks with chills running through his body, while facing an old obscure grave with Elizabeth Plummer chiseled into the old gravestone. It could just be a coincidence, but considering how freaky this cemetery was, while also living directly next to it, had my family freaked out for many nights afterwards. One night I was driving home at around 2 a.m, and this tiny white creature, probably as tall as a Pringles can, though maybe a bit smaller, walked across the road in front of my car. I couldn't believe what I saw, so I called my then boyfriend and practically described the creature. He told me it sounded like the Fresno Nightcrawler, and when I got home I looked it up, and it was exactly what I'd seen. I'd never heard about them before. I don't live in California, not even close. I still have no clue what it was. Some more details about what I saw. The bottom of its legs ended in what looked like flowy bits or ribbons. It was almost translucent. I could almost see through the creature. It walked at a kind of jaunty pace, like a person might walk. The best way to describe it is like that super steppy walk that the dwarves sometimes do in Snow White or Mickey Mouse sometimes does. I slowed my car down but was afraid to stop it completely, and the thing disappeared as it went through it. Honestly, it was so cute, I wasn't even scared. But I was shaken up, having seen something so strange. In 2016, my grandfather, who may as well have been my father, passed away on Halloween Day. He lived in a small house which I had shared for a few years not too long after his passing, in the small town I live in the south of Ireland. His passing was quite devastating for me and my family, and for that reason childhood memories and connections to the house made it quite difficult for us to go visit. Fast forward to Halloween 2 years ago, and the Hoover that we used at home broke. We didn't exactly have the money to buy a new one, so my mother said she was thinking of going to my grandfather's house to get the one there. To spare her the emotional journey into the house, I volunteered to go, and asked a longtime friend of mine who knew the house to come with me. We arrive at the house at around midday, maybe late 2 p.m, and go inside. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just silent and hollow, the void where my granddad used to be. My friend Harry had known me since we were in 6th grade, so at least 8 years at this point, and had come over to the house all the time. He knew the house and my family inside out, and we walked around the house in a sort of nostalgic silence, speaking occasionally about memories we shared there years before as we looked around. Eventually we made it to the back door of the house and out to the garden where a trampoline and a wooden shed where we used to play stood, still containing old things from our past, and this is where the main event of the day came. Having finished looking around out there, we turned to go inside. As I locked the shed and the garden gate, me and Harry heard a phone ringing. I didn't think anything of it, as I had seen the next door neighbour's back door open only a few moments before and assumed it was theirs. That is until Harry called my name and I turned to look at him. He was standing right at the back door to the house while I was about 5 meters further away, and he stared at me blankly and said, "The phone?" "Yes, the neighbour's," I said. And he goes, Nah, it's inside the house," before swiftly turning and walking inside. I was confused and followed him in quickly. When we reached the kitchen, I stood looking at Harry, standing beside my grandfather's chair, where he sat every day for as long as I can remember, was a landline sitting on it that was ringing. Me and Harry looked at each other shocked, as the phone line had been disconnected for more than 2 years at this point as far as we were aware, and the electricity was disconnected too, which meant no lights, nothing. Harry answered the phone and said, "Hello?" a few times, before saying there's no one there, and holding the phone out for me to take over. I did, and I said, "Hello?" a few times into the phone. "Is anyone there?" But I wasn't greeted with a reply. All I could hear was a slight static and the tone you would know if you'd have a wired landline. The one that you hear when you pick up and listen, before dialing any numbers. After a few moments I hung up the phone and left it a short while and picked it up again, hearing the same tone, slight static, and nothing else. I picked it up and put it down maybe 6 or 7 times before leaving it, after realizing the phone line was not only disconnected but also plugged out of the wall. Me and Harry decided to try and call the phone from his mobile, but it didn't ring, and instead we got the tone that indicates an invalid number. We tried again a few times to no avail, and then tried to call both our mobiles to the house phone. After dialing the numbers, neither of our phones rang, nor did the house phone. A few minutes more passed and we were sitting there wondering what was going on, until I picked up the noise again, and all noise had gone, and as many times as I picked it up it never returned. This was very confusing and emotional for me. I'd consider myself a bit of a soft touch, but my friend would be a much hardier type. It takes a lot more to get him upset. We both sat there in tears, wondering if this was some sort of sign from my granddad. It had been 2 years, and on occasion I'd been back to the house, and each time I'd pick up the phone to hear the usual dead silence. But I hope it is my grandfather, giving me one last sign that everything's alright, and that he made it to the other side, or whatever comes after. I'd like to think that. What else could it possibly be? It was pretty late at night, between 4 or 5 a.m. I fell asleep with my cell phone right beside me and I felt it vibrate. It wasn't that unusual for me being woken up like this. On weekends I get up pretty late, and my parents call me to wake me up or to make sure I'm up, and getting ready to go and getting lunch somewhere. But it was the middle of the night, and it was coming from my grandparents. I immediately answered thinking there was an actual emergency. My grandparents are 90 and 89, and my youngest uncle who lives with them has Down syndrome. They are pretty much vulnerable. When I answered the phone, my grandpa was on the other side of the line. His voice sounded as if he was answering the phone to me, and immediately told me who I was and asked him if everything was okay. He sounded confused, which I didn't think was a big deal, as he has trouble with hearing because of his age, and I thought he just forgot to put his hearing aids in. But then he started screaming and the phone call ended. This happened all in the span of a minute or so. I immediately tried to call back, absolutely terrified of something happening to them. After 3 unanswered calls, I was at the edge of a panic attack, if I wasn't already having one. I got out of my room, woke my dad up and told him what happened and showed him the call record on my phone so he couldn't brush it off, saying it was just a nightmare. I begged him to call them to make sure everything was alright. He told me he would do so and just to go to bed. I didn't sleep much that night. I was terrified. I was imagining the worst, but also analysing what happened and thinking of a logical explanation, but nothing makes sense to me. My grandpa is not the most technological guy. He's pretty old school in that way. My grandma is the one that uses their cell phone or their landline to communicate with us. I'm not really my grandpa's favourite, and I didn't know how I would be the first to be contacted if something had happened. For me, it's pretty hard to comprehend how the man that doesn't even know how to spell my name correctly knows my phone number. I have to also add that my grandpa is a very respected doctor who has won several awards and is the most healthy person I've known in my entire life. He hasn't lost any of his marbles, and he's pretty aware and conscious of all his surroundings at all times. In the early morning, my dad called and my grandma answered. Fortunately, everything was okay, and my grandma assured him no one called me during the night. My dad tries to give me the "you were just dreaming" speech, but once again I showed him the call I received and that I actually spoke to someone. He's a logical man, and he would try to give me an explanation, but this time he didn't even try. He was so freaked out that he pretended this conversation never happened and tried to continue with his day. I made my entire family check their phones so we could make sure no one was called that night, and it seemed that it was just me who had received this strange phone call. I buried that memory on the remotest corner of my brain and hoped it would just never pop up again and that I could forget about it, because it really has scared me. It was Christmas Day 2012. I was 16, and my mum and I were driving back home after spending Christmas Day with our extended family in Greater London. Me and Mum lived alone with our dog Pika, and we were just chatting away about Christmas. Then the conversation moved to Santa Claus, and we started talking about holiday mythical characters like the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. We talked for a while about how when I was younger, my mum used to keep my baby teeth in a small jar with a blue fairy on top, and I always remembered this jar from my childhood but hadn't seen it in many years. I remember that last time I had seen it, it was partially wrapped in black duct tape, obviously to stop it falling open, and if I had to estimate when this was, I'd say several years before, probably around the time we were moving house and were packing, so circa 2007. We spoke for a while about baby teeth in this jar, and my mum also stated that she hadn't seen it in a long time and hoped that it wasn't lost during the process of our house move. I remember even saying that I thought it was a bit gross that my mum had kept all my teeth in the first place and that they were all just sitting in the house somewhere. This conversation went on for a while, and then we moved on to something else. We arrived home shortly after, walked in the front door and greeted my dog as usual. My mum walks into the kitchen and I follow immediately behind her, and there on the floor of the kitchen is the small jar opened in two pieces and all of these tiny baby teeth on the floor. My first reaction was to think that my mum was trying to spook me, although she has literally never played a prank on me in my whole life. But then I saw her face and realized she definitely wasn't. She immediately freaks out and starts ringing everyone she knows and telling them what happened. My dog, Pika, who was pretty old at that point, maybe 11, was very docile, and when we'd leave the house, she would never go rummaging through our belongings or anything like that. It really wouldn't be possible anyway, as most stuff is kept in drawers or cupboards that she can't access. Weird, right? I still don't have an explanation for it. My mum has a fair few unexplainable/weird stories about things that have happened to her before I was born, and although I know she was never lying to me, I was always a bit skeptical about the circumstances and thought she'd maybe missed something which could be explained logically. Then when this happened, I thought, oh crap, maybe she's right, because I literally can't explain this. This happened a few years back in October, which I think only adds to the spook factor. I was having a very rough week, as was my best friend, so we opted to do one of our favorite activities, driving through the city, windows down, listening to loud music. It was just what the doctor ordered. As we were fawning over all the Halloween decorations that were up, we reached the sketchier block. To explain, this stretch has no streetlights, and on our left is an about a quarter-mile-long fence which circles a cemetery, and ahead is an old but large Catholic cathedral. On our right, a field with two neighborhood entrances that are very spaced out from each other. The houses start a good distance from each other, and there are no other cars on the road. We see, coming seemingly out of thin air, a child maybe 7 years old running at a moderate pace along the fence line, away from the church. He has no shirt or shoes, long hair, light jeans, pale skin, and it was around 67 degrees out, wet from raining earlier in the evening, and he was very underdressed. My friend pops a U-turn as there are no other cars on the road, and in the 1.5 seconds it takes for us to turn, the child has vanished. The fence is made of spiked metal poles, too close together for a child to squeeze through, and way too tall for him to have scaled. Plus, they were wet, and would impale you. He definitely wouldn't have crossed 4 lanes in that time, let alone go through the field space to turn into the neighborhood. We were too close to the church up ahead in the original direction, so it would have been 1/4 mile to the closest intersection the way he was running. We watched him running as we turned, only to look away for that split second and he had vanished into thin air. To cover our bases, we circled around a few times. The neighborhoods were dark aside from a few string lights, but no one was out, no sign of the little boy anywhere. We just came to the conclusion that it must have been a ghost, as that was the only logical explanation, unless he fell down a kid-sized hole that had disappeared or could fly or jump super high. We were left baffled, and to this day, remain so. Between 1993 and 4, I lived in a haunted house in Asheville, North Carolina. Just an ordinary 1960s ranch house, but there definitely was a ghost of an elderly man who'd lived there who died from Alzheimer's. When I was looking at the empty house to rent, I opened the empty closet at the end of the hallway. I ran into a physical being. It felt exactly like running into a person, and I jumped backwards and fell to the floor. After moving in, I would hear him as he shuffled up and down the hallway in his slippers that went flap, flap, flap as he paced. I had my sewing machine in what used to be his bedroom, and I would hear him open the front door, walk down the hallway, turn the doorknob to the room, and the door would swing open. The front door had not, and no one was in the hallway. I never felt threatened, but I do have a heightened sense of awareness. He also loved the music box we received as a wedding present. I would hear it being wound up on the shelf in the other bedroom, and it would start to play by itself. It would always soothe him. My boyfriend and I got married while living in that house. Several of our out-of-town guests stayed with us, and my boyfriend's brother and his wife stayed the night in the haunted room. I casually asked the next morning how they slept, and they said fine. But Anna said she had a weird dream that there was an old man standing over and staring at them. I laughed and told her that it was our resident ghost, as she'd turned pale, and they were packed up and heading to a Hilton in 10 minutes. A friend of mine slept over some nights in that room and had nothing happen. One of the guys I worked with in the newsroom in Asheville, North Carolina, said he stayed in his grandparents' lot when he was little. They had a 2-story house, but when he was 2 years old they removed the 2nd floor. And forever after you could hear footsteps overhead, doors opening, rocking chairs squeaking, and yet there was no 2nd floor. Even a rooster crowing occasionally that was never there either. I had a really crappy basement apartment in an apartment building that was about 50 years old. This apartment was on Coventry Road in Cleveland Heights. Coventry Road has been a kind of outcast mecca, starting with the hippies in the 60s. It's full of quirky shops and people just kind of hanging out there and people watch. A friend of mine knocked at the door as I stood up and started walking towards it, when I got a case of full-body goosebumps. We're talking head to toe here. I look over the other side of the room, and that's when I saw a man wearing a flannel plaid shirt and bell-bottoms. I ran to the door and my friend was like, "Dude, are you okay? You look like you just saw a ghost." After digging into it, I learnt my apartment building and the retail building next door caught on fire in the 70s, and a number of people died. My apartment building was the very first apartment building next to the main shopping complex, which was burnt down twice supposedly for insurance money by the owner of the complex, who also owned my apartment building. So I wonder if this man was a victim in one of the fires, and if he simply can't move on. But I cannot adequately express just how profoundly disturbed I was from seeing him. Of course, a few moments later he was gone, which made it all the worse. What do you think? Is he lingering around? Will he stay here? I think it might be time to leave. When I was about 13, I was alone in my house gaming on my PC. The house was a 3-story one, and you could look down from my computer area towards the kitchen on the 2nd floor. At around 8 PM on the night, my hair stood on the back of my neck, as it felt very eerily cold. I jolted and turned around, thinking someone was right behind me, but there was nothing there. But there was this intense fear that I was feeling. I actually left the house and ran to my friend's house a few streets away and hung out there until my parents returned. A few weeks later, I was talking to my mum, and she asked me something that made my blood run cold. She was actually a psychic reader on the night I was home alone. I don't believe in them, but she used to go to this woman a lot. She has recordings of the sessions on tapes, and she said the woman told me she always felt uneasy when she was in the kitchen, like someone was watching her. The woman said to her, "Yes, there's an old man living in your house. Your son just saw him." Mum said it freaked her out. I'm not sure why. It was only a few weeks later when she asked me about it. Maybe she thought I'd be like, "Whatever, weirdo," in my teenage way. It's still something I think about to this day, which is what makes me question supernatural things at times. I don't usually believe in them because I'm quite a logical thinker, but that was such a bizarre and creepy experience, I can't shake it from my head. I also remember never feeling safe being alone in that house after that as well. I used to close every door in the house going forward if I have to stay there by myself. Let me take you back a few years to when I was 10 years old and spending the night at my grandma's house. My aunt dropped my younger cousin over too, and they were 4 and 5 years old. I woke up around 2 AM or so and was super thirsty and decided to go downstairs to get some water. 10-year-old me was scared as hell downstairs, so I lit up downstairs like it was Christmas holiday. As I turn around to stop drinking water, I see some super white, ethereal looking kid laugh and walk down the hallway leading to the garage. He walks through the garage door. At that moment I said screw this, turned off the lights and went upstairs, locked my door and went to sleep. I asked my grandma if my cousins had woken up during the night or something, thinking maybe that's what I saw. She told me that my aunt picked them up at midnight, and it was just me, my grandma and grandpa at the house after midnight. My 2 sisters have also seen something similar at my grandma's house. No one knows anything. I'm an atheist, and still have no answers for what I saw that night, besides some dead kid's spirit trespassing. Who knows what they wanted? Have you ever received a strange phone call when a loved one has passed? If you have, you know how strange it can be. This incident in particular happened late one night in my grandma-in-law's kitchen. Grandma had a sister-in-law who was visiting from the East Coast. She had gotten in late that night, and I went over to visit the 2 of them with my husband. There were a lot of jokes going around the table, and Grandma started coughing from laughing too hard. Now she was in poor health, and as it was, she was supposed to be taking breathing treatments. However, as she was having so much fun, which was rare since my grandpa passed away, she didn't want to leave the table. My husband was concerned and told her that she had to take her breathing treatment. After some convincing, she got up and started heading in that direction. But then she got sucked back into that conversation and distracted from her treatment again. She again started coughing heavily, and that was the moment when my husband told her again she needed to take her treatment. "If Grandpa saw you now, he'd be nagging at you to take the treatment," my husband told her. "That's right," my grandma's sister-in-law said. "Don't make me have him call you." Grandma gave a little, "yeah, right" kind of chuckle. And right at that moment, the sister-in-law's track phone that she only used when traveling started ringing. We all stood there spooked for a moment, and then my sister-in-law went to answer it. and it immediately disconnected when she opened it, after several rings. The weirdest part was that this was around 11:30 East Coast time on a phone that no one would have the number to outside of our immediate family. Grandma immediately took her breathing treatment after that, not wanting to argue with what could have been a message from the beyond. Her husband had always reminded her about her treatments while alive, so it wouldn't be unusual for him to do the same after. I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but I'd like to think it was Grandpa. I know that my grandpa felt that way too, especially after other instances of footsteps in the house and sounds of him getting up in the middle of the night for water, long after he passed. A few years ago, when we were getting to head up north to camp to celebrate my grandmother's 90th birthday, some weird things started going on with my aunt, who ultimately ended up not coming to the birthday. Where our camp is, there's no electricity or reception, and no one had been able to get in touch with her. A few days later, when we'd gotten back to camp, no one was able to reach her either, and a wellness check was done. The police informed us that she had passed away. Just before the police arrived, the house phone rang, and it was long distance, which meant that it was my aunt who was calling. My mother happened to pick up the phone, said hello a few times, and then told the caller to shove their goodbye. The next day at dinner, the phone rang long distance again, and my mind immediately went to my aunt. I was the one to answer this time. It was a complete dead silence on the line, and I was just about to hang up when a very small female voice said, "Goodbye," and the line went dead. This happened a few more times over the next few days, and my mother received the call again, my sister on her cell phone, and my cousin, my aunt's son, on his. This call happened when we were all together, and they were all exactly the same. It may simply be a very strange coincidence, or it could have just been my aunt saying goodbye. The story I'm about to share took place in 1987, when I was 8 years old. It was Christmas Eve, and like any other Christmas Eve, it was a cheerful night for a kid, because as you know, there would likely be presents under the tree the next morning. But as the saying goes, he sees you when you're sleeping. So in order to be able to open the gifts for the next morning, I would have to fall asleep for St. Nick to come. I remember watching TV in my room that I shared with my younger brother, who was 5. My other family, such as my mum, dad, older sister, and my grandma, who had come down from Wisconsin to visit, were all downstairs, I think putting on the candy canes and ornaments. The reason they would do it on Christmas Eve was because me and my brother were clumsy for knocking over the trees and leaving our family to pick up all the decorations, sometimes sneaking to eat the candy canes, but I can't remember if they were doing that or just talking and watching TV. At some time in the night, I thought probably around 10:30 to 11, I fell asleep and woke up around what I assume was 5 p.m. I woke up to footsteps and a bell jingling noise. I turned on my side facing towards my TV and our doorway. I remember seeing the door creak, and then a yellowish-white man stepped in. And when I say yellowish, I mean that his skin was a glowing color. And as a kid, I was thrilled because there was St. Nick in my house sneaking into my room. But when I tried to jolt my body, I couldn't move, not a muscle. At this point, the Santa man was in my room and facing towards my TV, which was showing Mickey's Christmas Channel. Then I remembered him turning his head to look straight at me, and when he saw me, he came straight towards me, but I don't remember him actually making his way towards me or moving, not as in levitating either, but something that's hard to explain. His body just moved without him taking the steps to do so. I remember him looking down at me with a sparkle and glowing big eyes. He bent down and whispered in my ear, 41, before vanishing. After that I could move again, and when I got up I saw something out of my peripheral vision, and when I looked out the side of the window in which I'd seen him, in a distance, I felt like he was riding in a sleigh. But it was far in the sky, so I really couldn't see it properly. But it was like a little flash of light popped in the sky, and he was gone. I ran downstairs to find all types of presents under the tree, and at this time my brother was up, and had woke up my parents to tell them that Santa had come and had dropped off presents. Both my parents came down, my grandmother already being downstairs due to her sleeping on the pull-out couch, and my sister, who was 12 at the time, had been awoken by my brother too. After opening up the presents, I remember telling my dad that Santa had stopped by and I'd seen him just minutes before. I remember my dad asking if he came from the window, and if he tried to take me with him. But after denying all of his questions and telling him about the whole story, including the part where I couldn't move, my dad brushed it off as a dream. And when I turned 11, my parents told me the truth about Christmas. I had remembered the incident from 3 years prior, but kind of brushed it off as a dream, even though the whole thing seemed to be so real. Fast forward to the year 2020. I'm 41. I now have a wife, 3 kids, a boy and 2 girls, and it was Christmas Eve, and my wife and I had just laid down from an exhausted evening and finishing wrapping presents. Not having work the next day, or any other day until after New Year's, I knew I was going to sleep in that night until I was woken up by my 5-year-old daughter, as she had done previously years before, since she was able to talk and know about Christmas. I remember checking to make sure my daughters were asleep before putting gifts under the tree. I knew my son was probably asleep too, as we always told him to, since it was Christmas Eve, the day before Christmas, and there was probably going to be family over the next day. Very short family though, since during this time period quarantine was still a thing, and I remember going to sleep at midnight and waking up at 4. The whole house was dark, and I could hear my wife soundly asleep next to me. I was in a bit of confusion because I rarely woke up throughout the middle of the night unless I had to use the restroom badly, or if someone woke me up. It seemed like the restroom part wasn't the case in this situation, and instead I heard footsteps on the roof, and then a second later, the jingling of bells. I tried to push my body up to see who was there, who it was, if it was my son or one of my daughters opening up and grabbing their presents or something like that. That's probably where the jingling sound was coming from, the box. As I'm laying in bed with the door halfway open and laying on my back, my body is positioned towards the door and I heard the sound get closer. But as it does, I see a glow in the hall. We had 2 night lights, but this color was a yellowish light, and the night lights we had were red, that lit up the hall enough to see your steps in the hallway if you had to use the restroom. But like I said, this color was different. And also, I've heard of sleep paralysis before, but this is just my body was too sore to move or anything. As the sound of the bells kept reaching the door, I saw Santa. This time it freaked me out unlike it had done in decades. When I first saw him, everything was the same. The smile, everything. But the most terrifying thing again is that I really remember him walking away, but when he did move away, I was able to move again. I was still in shock but wanted to go out in the hallway to confront this intruder or thing, but as I did, I didn't see anything. I just heard the footsteps on the roof again, and as I ran outside to look on top of the roof, I didn't see anything in the distance. I saw an object in the sky, then a flash of light and nothing. I was confused, my heart racing. I knew what I had seen years ago was not a dream, and now I went back to the house. As I did, I checked on my son's room and my daughter to make sure it wasn't any of them that had anything to do with it. They were out cold, all of them. When I went back into the room with my wife now up, she asked why I was awake so early. Couldn't sleep. Did I wake you? I reply. She replies with no, which was kind of a surprise to me, but what she told me next sent a shiver down my spine. She said she woke up because she had a dream about a man in a red suit dressed exactly like St. Nick, sitting down in our dining room kitchen drinking milk that her and our daughters had poured for Santa last night. She said that she couldn't see his face because in her dream his face was away from her, but also that he was like a source of light in the dark dining room, because after he left she woke up. After telling me this, something told me to go downstairs and check the dining room, and when I went, sure enough, the milk was poured, was only halfway empty, and with 2 cookies left on the plate that they had made the previous night. I thought my wife was playing tricks with me, but after asking she swore that she hadn't. With these incidents, it was hard for me to fall back asleep that night. Good thing is that my wife stayed up. She knew that in about an hour it was going to be jolted back by one of our daughters yelling it was Christmas, so we stayed up and talked about things. The only person I ever told about this was my dad, since he was the one I told the first Santa event to. I asked him if he remembered the first one, and he said he did, and he remembered asking if there was a burglar who had tried to steal the Christmas gifts. After telling my dad the recent scene though, he had agreed that it was something paranormal or out of this world. I'm 42 now, and wonder if anyone has experienced what I have. I'd be interested to find out. I was babysitting my 3-year-old niece by myself. When it was nap time, I ran her a warm bath to help settle her. At a certain moment during the bath, she stood up, looked right behind me towards the door, smiled and waved. I looked behind me and there was no one there. All you could see was a hallway without a line of sight to any windows. I turned back to her and tried to grab her attention by saying her name. She just kept looking past me and smiling. She went back to playing in the bath a few seconds later. Later that night, I told my sister the story, and apparently, the twin brother of her current neighbor passed away in this very house. I wonder if that is who she saw. My daughter was a newborn, and I was a sleep-deprived mother. The phone rang at 3 a.m. and woke up my husband and I. He got up to answer it, and as he left the room I felt something under me. I was laying across my baby. I must have taken her to bed and fell asleep. It is exactly what parents are warned about, and I felt awful that I made this mistake. My daughter was fine. I must have only just rolled onto her, and my husband returned to the bedroom saying it was someone speaking a different language and he couldn't understand. We were very shaken up, and I took precautions to ensure it never happened again. My daughter is 18 and likes to think she had a guardian angel who made the call to save her that night. It's always creeped me out a lot. What do you guys think? I used to live out in the boonies, and during a drive home from work one night, I spot a bright light just sitting in place over a patch of woods. I had never seen a light there before, so figured it was maybe a very tall work light or something. By the time I passed, the light was gone, and I turned around to make sure it wasn't a light facing one direction, but there was no light at all. I get home and tell my mum about it, and she says that it's the same spot where my sister spotted a similar one some nights a few weeks prior. Then my mother proceeds to tell me that she thinks she saw a ghost on that corner once. When we first moved to the area, she was driving home from work and saw a lady in a white dress walking around 11 p.m, turned around to offer her a ride and she was gone. And this was in the late 90s, in the middle of absolutely nowhere. A few years back, I was driving home one night down an old road. As I approached a 4-way stop sign at the end of it, I could see a shape of another car in the road in front of me. Instead of going through the stop sign, it turned sharply to the right and went off the road. I heard a colossal crashing sound, so I stopped and ran out of my car. It was after midnight and there weren't any other cars on the road. I ran down past the communal mailbox that the car barreled past and down towards the ditch in the direction I saw it go. The only thing I saw was a memorial for a crash that had happened 2 years prior, and I spent 5 minutes or so searching and shouting and found nothing else. So what the hell did I see? The ghost of a car crash that happened 2 years ago? It seems logical, and yet doesn't. I really can't explain this. When I was 7, about a year after my dad died, I woke up in the middle of the night and sat up in bed. I looked outside my room towards the stair and saw the perfect shadow of a man, even though it was completely pitch black inside the house. I cried myself to sleep and woke up a short time later and the shadow was gone. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check on my mum. She had double doors in her room that were cracked. I peeked in and clear as day saw the shadow figure walk around my mum's bed, and then it leaned over to my mum from the other side of the bed. I shined the light at my feet and the figure shot up and turned and walked into the bathroom. I told my mum and sister the next day, and had both of them freaked out for a while. I'm almost 30 now, and can still remember it very vividly, and don't really think I was imagining it. I haven't had any paranormal experiences since. I think my dad just wanted to say goodbye one last time. My mum and I were chilling in the living room downstairs. We had just moved in at the time, and all the bedrooms were upstairs. I come back and my mum is absolutely shaken, but I can't see why. So I ask her what happened, and she tells me that she heard my dad say, "Darling, come back to bed," in Urdu, and that she heard him say it from the room from behind us. But Dad was sleeping upstairs that night, and no one was in the room behind us. We went to investigate to make sure it wasn't a prank, but of course, it wasn't. It was so realistic, and many other experiences happened after that left us all weirded out and shaken. I want to know if anyone else has had a similar experience to me, so I know I'm not the only one, because it's crazy, isn't it? Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. As always, I hope you enjoyed tonight's collection of stories. If of course you did, you can let me know down below. A huge thank you as always to my members and my patrons. Those are the people's names who you see on screen. For a small donation every month, they get access to credits at the end, the ultimate honor, and a whole bunch of exclusive content over on Patreon and or the membership page. So if that interests you even a little bit, feel free to check it out. But that's it from me. If you want more spooks, follow the links on screen now. Until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.